The following video has been created without the use of AI. Please support your human content creators by liking the video and commenting something down below. Subscribing is optional. Now please, enjoy the show. Z-0012 was a benign anomaly, discovered within a sealed chamber in an ancient Mayan temple. It was an almost perfectly cube-shaped entity, with tentacles, eyes, and toothless mouths and orifices. Its reddish peach skin thin and vulnerable to damage. The flesh cube was discovered in what Urban Shade described as a malnourished state, as its bones and rib cages were visible. Luckily, at least partially, the anomaly had been understood, judging by the Mayan paintings on the chamber's walls. The Mayans saw the cube as a manifestation or avatar of their god, Itzmana, the creator god, due to its abilities. The inside of the cube was hollow and could manifest all different kinds of rooms, made out of the same flesh, sinew, and bone as the cube itself. The Mayans saw the inside of the cube as a depiction of what Itzmana desired. If the room was akin to a sacrificial temple chamber, the god was considered hungry, desiring sacrifice. If the room took on the form of that of a Mayan villager's home, it was seen as a divine judgment of peace, meaning good luck for the person. And if it looked like no one's place to live, they believed to rebuild the interior in a new house would bring prosperity. It was simple, but Urban Shade desired to fully understand it. And they learned that the inside of Z-0012 was always different, with only one room repeating, the sacrificial chamber room. The Urban Shade science team came to understand that the cube created rooms of desire within it. When people were around the cube and thinking about a room they required in the moment, the cube would generate it, mutating the muscles, bones, and flesh on its inside into the desired abode. The sacrificial chamber being a sort of exception. It's how the cube fed, though anything sufficed when the sacrificial chamber was there. Humans weren't really required. All it wanted was meat. And so, Z-0012 became a popular way of disposing of expendables that outlived their usefulness. And it was this cube Sebastian rediscovered in the quarantined sector of the Black Side. He had completely forgotten about it, as it wasn't actively useful to him at the time, especially since it was immobile. But perhaps now he had a use for it. He slithered into the large metal chamber the cube was located in. It pulsated, breathed, and blinked, its various orifices leaking various smelling fluids. The cube looked sickly. The floor was covered in what Sebastian would later discover were its feces and urine. And sure, Sebastian saw himself as above that, but he had nothing better to do right now. So begrudgingly, he began cleaning the containment chamber, even using Urban Shade's cleaning utensils specifically used to take care of the meat cube's sensitive skin, to make the orifices less disgusting to look at, as they pulsated, opened and closed. It was almost something like fun. Fun in the same sense caring for a beached whale was until rescue services arrive. The cube didn't react to his presence, but to the cleanliness, to the water, to the soap. Its mass seemed to relax, making itself just slightly bigger, and more blood seemed to pump throughout the thing, making its skin appear healthy again. Some of the mouth-shaped orifices even opened up, licking the air, a behavior observed by Urban Shade after every clean and feeding. It is assumed this was the cube's pleasure response. Multiple little mouths with little tongues opened, licking, feeling around like tiny red tentacles. A truly revolting sight. At least until one of the tongues shot forward, longer than the others, wrapping around Sebastian's wrist. "Hey!" Sebastian shouted, pulling away, but the cube was too strong. He was being pulled towards it. And with a wet, loud smack, his body slapped against the still moist cube. But the toothless mouth didn't try to eat him. It just seemed to want to show appreciation in the only way a being without limbs could. As his arm was shoulder deep in the cube's mouth, its tongue gently stroking his scales, his entire body shivered in disgust. Finally letting him pull out, Sebastian almost vomited. But in the same motion, a loud, wet slapping noise behind him caught the saboteur's attention. Cautiously, he approached. It was the cube's room, finally opening. It was a huge, anus-like orifice, large enough for people to enter through. The wet slapping had come from the room's tongue, which functioned like an access ramp, ironically making the flesh room quite disability-friendly. Sebastian looked inside and he gasped. While everything was made out of sinewy flesh and bone, and a rug made out of hair, it looked like the entrance to his very own apartment. The flesh room had realized his desire to sleep in his own bed again, and generated it. Cautiously, Sebastian narrowed his eyes, going inside. The inside was dry, surprisingly, despite appearing to glisten. Blood was pumping through every object. And Sebastian skeptically tilted his head. A picture of an ocean he had back in the day hung in his living room. It was present, though of course made out of meat. In fact, it was the meat's artistic marbling that displayed what the picture showed. Sebastian thought for a moment. He should be losing his mind seeing this. It was eldritch and scary yet fascinating, and his gaze moved to the big slab of meat that mimicked his bed. Containing his disgust, Sebastian pushed forward and lied down. For obvious reasons, there was no blanket present and no pillow, just it straight up grew out of the mattress. Oh well. It was soft, squishy, and just enough resistance to be comfortable. He sighed, coming down a little, before removing his disruptor that prevented Urban Shade from being able to tell exactly where he was in the facility. Leaning it against the meat bed, lying down, Sebastian closed his eyes, humming off into sleep. From that night on, Sebastian used the flesh cube as a personal hideout. After all, Urban Shade needed to reach the quarantine zone in the first place if they wanted to retrieve it. Or in simpler terms, the flesh cube, as long as it wasn't hungry, was probably the safest place in the entire facility, as the cube would only allow humans inside of itself, due to them having the imagination necessary to create rooms within the thing's body. Anomalies were basically unable to enter. Though it wasn't until one day the room acted in a way that Sebastian was surprised by. It was earlier that day when the painter had managed to guess the password to a hostile anomaly's containment chamber, also located in a quarantine zone. They were called matchmaking slugs. These creatures originally inhabited a cave in Africa, and as a self-defense mechanism they utilized stingers that had an aphrodizing effect on whoever was hit by them. Luckily, Sebastian knew that the dosage was way too little for someone of his size. And normally, humans hit by the poison fell into an unending spiral of lustful desires that could only be filled through copulation. As a matter of fact, if an affected person didn't copulate within the first 12 hours, the hearts would give out. Smashing the humanoid mollusks with his tail, he got rid of the danger coming from the territorial monstrosities, but as his heart was beginning to race, as he pulled out a thick, dark green stinger from his tail, a thick chunk of greenish meat still clinging to it, pulsating, squeezing out mortar-like poison, his heart began to race. Disgusted, Sebastian threw it aside. Rubbing his eyes, he quickly made his way to a nearby toilet. One hand placed on his chest, he stared at the mirror. His heart was going faster by the second, and the glow of his eyes was changing color, slowly, like those gamer-like PCs. From the typical yellow-blue to a bright pink tone. Of course, he had always wondered how it felt to be infected. The expendable reports had been very detailed on that. Heartbeat increase, check. Sweat? Well, his fishy body didn't sweat, but as he touched the fins on his face, he could feel heat radiating off of them, which might as well be considered his form of sweating. Sebastian sighed and placed two hands on the sink. He wasn't that excited, right? Honestly, knowing exactly how the poison progressed made it worse, as every little heartbeat, every little thought, every little pulsation of his body, even muscle twitches, were now overanalyzed. Sebastian didn't leave the bathroom for another 30 minutes, as he just stared at himself in the mirror, inhaling, exhaling through his mouth. Salve was building up behind his lips, but I can deal with this, he muttered. His heart was racing, but not dangerously fast. Yeah, maybe he could get over this. Sebastian didn't even think about the possible consequences as he left the bathroom slowly, deliberately. After all, certain body parts of his was right now getting in the way of proper movement. And as he reached the meat cube, it opened. And Sebastian found himself in a large room with a singular bed in the middle that pulsated like a beating heart. The room wasn't empty, as the entire back wall was lined up with flesh-colored mannequins who had quivering veins running all over them. He looked at one of the many unresponsive eyes of Z-0012. Whatever, thought Sebastian. He needed a place to safely spend the duration of the poison's effects. Grunting, Sebastian threw himself onto the bed, lying down, breathing in and out, controlling himself, especially in here. Despite the comfort the flesh cube was giving him on a daily basis, he always felt watched. And so he tried to hide his shame, covering it up with a bag. But it was too late. The room was already reacting. as he heard your footsteps slowly and awkwardly coming closer. The saboteur gulped and turned around. Aside from a rather rhythmic heartbeat, there was no white noise ever in the room. And so the naked feet on naked flesh were definitely enough to get his attention. It was then that he saw you. You and your sisters. The mannequins, or more homunculi, created by Z-0012. Yet no signs of sentience, only the necessary organs to fulfill a certain act that Sebastian desired to fulfill. Just as the flesh cube demanded, your bodies were humanoid, lacked hands and proper feet. There were orifices located on your bodies, one at the lower half of your faces, appearing like a toothless mouth dripping with salvia. Your chests were bouncy, and at a rather impressive size too, but they lacked any definition, like an especially attractive Barbie doll. And of course, between your legs were the necessary holes required. You were connected to the room's ceiling via fleshy tubes, which fed you and your sisters the necessary blood and nutrients to exist, directly offered to you by Z-0012. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. While clearly horrifying, you and your sisters seem to have been specifically designed to be as unthreatening as possible, with that lack of hands and stumpy feet. Screw it, thought Sebastian. He had reached a point where he didn't care anymore. His brain was clouded with thoughts of your tight, wet holes, after all. And so with a toothy grin, he lied down on the bed, which pulsed in rhythm with the room's heartbeat. And that's when your arms' stumps slapped on the meaty mattress. You had barely any muscles and were unable to climb into it. Same with your sisters, who lined up around the bed. And so Sebastian leaned forward, grabbing your pathetic head. Instinctively your tongue shot out, licking over his hand. Ah, isn't this nice? Purred Sebastian as he pulled you onto him. He let go of your head, and you hung there, motionless, like a doll. He chuckled before sarcastically shouting, "Oh, so I have to do all the work myself, huh?" He grabbed your head with two hands, squeezing you before shoving his face onto yours. Greedily his tongue entered your mouth hole. Your mouth tasted of nothing but watery salvia. And about at the halfway point of his tongue pushing into you, he felt a resistance and a tiny, fleshy hole. He pulled away from you. With your head unmovingly low, it almost appeared as if you were disappointed. But then, he pried open your mouth. "Interesting," he hissed. "Allow me to try something." Out of one of his bags, he pulled a metal ball that up until now, to this point, he had used only to use as a noise distraction. And grinning, he shoved the thing into your mouth, forcing you to swallow it? That would be the closest way of describing it. You made a disgusting slurping sound. And moments later, Sebastian watched the ball's bulge run down your body. And about 10 minutes later, he was holding the now slimy ball in his third hand again. Now, Look at that, it's just one long, fleshy, narrow muscle tube. No bones, no organs. How interesting. He purred, mouth stretched into a violent grin. This means there's zero chance I can break you. Or your little sisters, huh? Sebastian licked his lips, grabbing two more of the mannequins, pulling them onto the bed. So being rough to you things is gonna be the best. Hey, thank you for watching the video until the very end. If you managed to get this far, leave a comment with the word pickles below as our little secret. But before I say goodbye, I'd like to shout out all of my lovely high-tier channel members, aka darling stewards, for keeping me and this channel alive. We have Jaws, Melofia, Nicole Hatcher, Maxicat, Alison Watkins, Bella Mare, Mystic Jade 111, Giovanna Moretti, Twilight Mia, Angry Boxman, Hella, Anonymous Weep, and Nicodemus D. And lastly, I'd like to mention all my other supporters for being awesome, and thank you. I'm eternally grateful for all of your donations. Thank you and goodbye.